You know what they say about Dubai weddings: gold, glamour, and guests who post more than they pray. But in 2024, one wedding broke all the records. Not for the champagne towers or the designer dress. No, this one made history because the bride was dead before sunrise, the groom had disappeared into thin air, and $500,000 worth of celebration had turned into the kind of nightmare that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love, revenge, and the masks people wear. Here's the thing though, and this is where it gets wild: the police thought they were walking into a crime of passion. You know, wedding night gone wrong, tempers flared, tragedy struck. But what they found instead? A psychological war that had been brewing for 2 solid years. Every smile, every tradition, every family blessing. All of it was theater. And the scariest part? Everyone involved was exactly where they were meant to be. I'm talking about a case so twisted that when you hear the full story, you're going to question every perfect couple you've ever seen on Instagram. Because this wasn't about love. This was about destruction. Carefully planned and executed with terrifying precision. Before we dive into this absolute chaos of a story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. May your mysteries always be solved, your true crime binges never be interrupted, and your wedding nights be significantly less murderous than this one. Seriously, subscribe. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. Now, let me introduce you to the players in this deadly game. Meet Dariush. 31 years old, real estate developer, self-made millionaire by 25, and heir to one of Dubai's most respected merchant families. Picture this: perfect teeth, perfect manners, the kind of guy who kisses his mother's hand in public and donates to charity with photographers watching. Everyone who knew him thought he was the golden boy of Emirati society. But here's what nobody knew. Locked away in his private study, behind doors that even his family couldn't access, Dariush kept journals. Not about business deals or investment strategies. No, these journals were about women. Specifically about testing them, exposing them, destroying them. For 3 years, Dariush had been running what he called purity investigations. His targets? Educated, independent women, the kind who had lived abroad, spoke multiple languages, had careers. Women who, in his twisted view, threatened traditional values by pretending to be modest while hiding their past. And get this, he'd already done this to 3 women before our victim. Not killed them. No, what he did was almost worse. Complete and total social destruction. He would hire private investigators, plant fake friends in their circles, create elaborate fake social media profiles, and gather evidence of any past relationships. Then, when he had enough ammunition, he would orchestrate their public humiliation so thoroughly that they'd lose everything. Jobs, friends, family, respect, sometimes even their will to live. His method was always the same. Months of surveillance, psychological manipulation, building detailed profiles of their fears and vulnerabilities. Then the reveal. Always public, always devastating, always final. But this time, something changed. This time, Dariush didn't just want to expose her. He wanted to marry her first. Why? Because somewhere along the way, this predator had evolved into something even more terrifying. He genuinely believed he was doing God's work, cleansing Dubai of impure women through marriage and revelation. In his mind, he wasn't a stalker. He was a righteous warrior protecting traditional values. The wedding wasn't arranged by families, as everyone believed. Dariush had orchestrated every single detail, manipulating both sets of parents into thinking it was their idea. 2 years of setup. 2 years of pulling strings. And his victim was about to walk straight into his trap. Or so he thought. Now meet Yasmin. 26 years old. International business graduate. Fluent in 4 languages. Daughter of a government official. Beautiful, brilliant, everything a traditional family could dream of. The kind of woman who could discuss market trends over breakfast and quote poetry at dinner. But Yasmin was carrying a secret that was slowly eating her alive. During her university years in London, she'd fallen in love. Really? Deeply. The kind of love that makes you stupid and hopeful and completely vulnerable. The relationship lasted 2 years before ending when her boyfriend returned home for an arranged marriage. Heartbreak. Healing. Moving on. Normal stuff, right? Except for the past 6 months, Yasmin had been receiving messages. Anonymous ones. Photos of her with her university boyfriend. Screenshots of their private conversations. Text messages that simply said, "I know who you really are." At first, she thought it was her ex being weird, maybe trying to reconnect. Then she wondered if it was some cruel prank from someone at university. But as the messages became more detailed, more invasive, more threatening, she realized something absolutely chilling. Someone had been watching her, studying her, documenting her every move for months. And then came the marriage proposal from Dariush's family. Here's where Yasmin proved she was nobody's victim, because she did something that would change everything. She investigated. She traced the fake accounts, followed the digital breadcrumbs, connected the dots. And what she discovered made her blood run cold. Dariush wasn't just her potential husband. He was her stalker. The anonymous messages, the surveillance, the photographs, it was all him. And now he wanted to marry her. But why? What was his endgame? Yasmin made a decision that would seal both their fates. She would marry him, but she would be ready. She would use his own game against him. She would destroy him before he could destroy her. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that this wedding was about to become a collision of multiple disasters, each more twisted than the last. Because here's the thing about this case that makes it even more heartbreaking. Both families were drowning in their own desperate lies. Yasmin's father, despite his prestigious government position, was facing complete financial ruin, but not for the reasons anyone thought. His wife's cancer treatment? A convenient cover story. The truth was darker. Years of corruption, illegal deals, bribes that were now catching up with him. His enemies were closing in and he needed protection. Fast. This marriage wasn't about tradition or love. It was about survival. Dariush's family had money, connections, and most importantly, the kind of influence that could make criminal charges disappear. So when the proposal came, Yasmin's father jumped on it without asking a single question about his daughter's happiness or safety. She was a chess piece in his game of staying out of prison. And Dariush's family? Equally rotten. Their entire real estate empire was built on forged documents and government fraud. Money laundering, tax evasion, illegal land deals stretching back decades. They needed legitimacy, political connections, and Yasmin's father's influence to avoid prosecution. When Dariush presented this perfect match, both families saw their salvation. Neither cared about their children. Neither asked the right questions. They were so desperate for their own rescue that they handed their kids over to fate like sacrificial offerings. Both families pretending to follow traditional values while hiding criminal enterprises. Both using their children as shields. Both about to watch everything crumble. 2 years before the murder, Dariush attended a university alumni event. Boring networking thing, champagne and small talk, the usual. But that night changed everything. Across the crowded ballroom, he saw her, Yasmin, laughing with friends, elegant in a modest black dress, her intelligence radiating from every conversation. To Dariush, she appeared to be everything he valued, educated but respectful, modern but traditional, confident but humble. He watched her for hours, studying her mannerisms, her interactions, the way she carried herself. That night, he went home and created his first file on her. At first, he told himself it was just curiosity, maybe genuine interest. But within weeks, curiosity became obsession. And obsession became something far more sinister. Through careful social media stalking, Dariush discovered Yasmin's secret. Photos from her London university days showed her with a young man, clearly more than friends. The images were innocent, holding hands, laughing together, a kiss on the cheek. But to Dariush, evidence of fraud, proof that she was pretending to be pure while hiding a shameful past. Instead of moving on like any normal person would, Dariush made the decision that would ultimately lead to murder. He would expose her, but not immediately. He would create an elaborate trap to systematically destroy her reputation, just like he'd done to 3 others before her. He hired a private investigator who specialized in what they called reputation management. For months, this guy followed Yasmin everywhere, photographing her daily routines, recording phone conversations when possible, building a comprehensive profile of her life, her fears, her vulnerabilities. But Dariush didn't stop there. He created multiple fake social media accounts using stolen photos and carefully crafted personalities. Through these fake personas, he befriended Yasmin's acquaintances, learning about her job, her family's struggles, her mother's supposed illness, and most importantly, her shame about her past relationship. The harassment began subtly. Anonymous messages with cryptic references to London. Fake accounts commenting on her photos with veiled threats. Dariush even paid people to casually ask her friends about her reputation at social gatherings. He wanted to isolate her, make her paranoid, break her down slowly. What Dariush didn't know was that Yasmin was far smarter than his previous victims. After weeks of mysterious messages and strange coincidences, Yasmin started paying attention to patterns. Her background in international business had taught her about corporate espionage and surveillance techniques. She began taking notes, documenting everything, conducting her own investigation. The breakthrough came when she noticed the same username across multiple platforms making subtle inquiries about her past. She traced the account back to a fake email address, which led to a phone number, which ultimately revealed Dariush's involvement. But what she discovered next absolutely shocked her. Through careful online detective work, Yasmin found 3 other women who had been systematically destroyed by the same man. All were educated professionals. All had past relationships. All had been publicly humiliated and driven from Dubai after their secrets were exposed. One woman had attempted suicide. Another had fled the country in shame. The third had been disowned by her family. Yasmin realized she wasn't just being stalked. She was being hunted by a serial predator who used tradition and honor as weapons to destroy women's lives. But unlike his previous victims, Yasmin wasn't planning to run. She was planning to fight back. When Dariush's family approached hers with the marriage proposal, Yasmin understood immediately what was happening. This wasn't an arranged marriage. It was the final stage of his twisted game. He wanted to marry her first, then expose her past, maximizing both his control and her humiliation. But Yasmin had a plan of her own. She would marry him, but she would use their wedding night to destroy him instead. She began secretly recording their conversations, documenting his manipulative behavior, gathering evidence of his stalking campaign. She contacted his previous victims, building a case that would expose his pattern of abuse. She was preparing for war, and the battlefield would be their wedding suite. What neither of them realized was that when you have 2 predators circling each other, both planning destruction, both convinced they're the hunter, someone's going to die. The wedding arrived like a perfectly choreographed performance. 500 guests filled the ballroom of Dubai's most exclusive hotel, completely unaware they were witnessing the final act of a 2-year psychological war that would end in blood. Dariush played his role flawlessly. The respectful groom kissing his father's hand, accepting congratulations with humble smiles, his eyes never leaving his bride. To everyone watching, he appeared nervous but happy. What they couldn't see was the anticipation burning in his chest. Tonight, he would finally execute the plan he'd been perfecting for months. Yasmin was equally convincing. She blushed at the right moments, lowered her eyes when spoken to, played the part of the innocent, nervous bride to perfection. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed the marriage contract, which guests attributed to wedding day nerves. But the trembling wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline. Hidden in her wedding dress was a small recording device. Every conversation, every moment was being documented. She was building evidence that would destroy Dariush and expose his crimes to the world. The families beamed with pride, each believing they'd secured their salvation through this union. The guests posted endless photos on social media, tagging it as the perfect Dubai wedding. Ancient ceremonies were performed while modern psychological warfare happened right in front of them. As midnight approached, the couple was escorted to their suite on the top floor. Rose petals scattered on marble, champagne chilling in crystal buckets. The door closed behind them, and the performance finally ended. The presidential suite fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic far below. Dariush's mask slipped first, The respectful groom vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. He walked to his suitcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. "I know who you really are," he said, his voice empty of emotion. "I know about London. I know about him. I know everything." Yasmin's face went pale, exactly as Dariush had imagined it would. He opened the folder, revealing photographs of her with her university boyfriend, printed conversations, detailed surveillance reports, 2 years of stalking laid out like evidence in a court case. "You thought you could deceive me," Dariush continued, his voice rising with righteous anger. "You thought you could make a fool of me, of my family, of everything we stand for. But I've been watching you, documenting your lies, and now everyone will know what you really are." He was savoring this moment, the reveal, the breakdown he'd been anticipating for months. But instead of tears, instead of pleas for forgiveness, Yasmin did something that shattered his world. She smiled. "I know," she said simply. "I've known it was you all along." Now it was Dariush's turn to go pale. Yasmin reached into her wedding dress and pulled out her phone, showing him the recording app that had been running all evening. Then she pulled out her own folder, thicker than his. "I know about Samira, about Nadia, about Lena," she said, naming his previous victims. "I know about your sick obsession with destroying women. I know about your private investigator, your fake social media accounts, your systematic harassment campaigns. I have recordings of you planning this whole thing." Dariush's carefully constructed world began crumbling. "You're not the only one who can play games," Yasmin continued, her voice growing stronger. "I've been building a case against you for months. I've contacted your previous victims. I have evidence of your stalking, harassment, criminal behavior. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in Dubai will know exactly what kind of monster you are." The hunter had become the hunted, and he couldn't handle it. What happened next was the collision of two massive egos, two people who refused to lose, both convinced they were righteous in their revenge. The psychological battle escalated quickly. Dariush's rage at being outsmarted by a woman he'd considered his prey collided with Yasmin's fury at being stalked and terrorized for 2 years. But Yasmin had made one fatal miscalculation. She'd assumed that exposing Dariush would be enough to stop him. She hadn't anticipated the depth of his narcissistic rage when confronted with his own failure. When Dariush realized he'd been manipulated by the very woman he'd spent 2 years trying to destroy, something inside him snapped. The psychological warfare became physical. The struggle was brief and brutal. When the violence ended, the suite was eerily quiet. 2 phones lay on the marble floor, still recording. Evidence of both their schemes scattered around the room. His surveillance files, her counter-investigation documents, recordings of their mutual deception. Hidden in Yasmin's belongings, police would later find something heartbreaking. A suicide note she'd written as a backup plan, prepared to destroy herself rather than let Dariush destroy her reputation. The twisted irony was complete. Both had gotten exactly what they planned for, each other's total destruction. Neither family would get what they desperately needed. The perfect wedding had become the perfect crime scene. As dawn broke over Dubai's glittering skyline, the most expensive wedding in the city's history had become its most shocking murder case. When Dubai police entered the presidential suite that morning, they expected a typical domestic violence case. What they discovered instead was evidence of the most elaborate psychological warfare campaign in the city's history. Both phones were still recording when they arrived. Hours of audio revealed the shocking truth. This wasn't a simple murder, but the violent climax of a 2-year game of mutual psychological torture. The evidence painted a picture of systematic stalking that went beyond anything investigators had seen. Dariush's files contained hundreds of photographs taken without Yasmin's knowledge, detailed psychological profiles, records of everyone he'd paid to gather information. But equally disturbing were Yasmin's own documents, recordings of Dariush's conversations, evidence of his previous victims, a carefully planned strategy to destroy his reputation. Neither victim nor perpetrator. Both were predators who had hunted each other to death. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Dariush's private investigator, a man named Karim who specialized in reputation management. Under interrogation, Karim broke down and confessed to 2 years of systematic stalking. He was sick, Karim told investigators, his hands shaking. He would spend hours studying these women, learning their fears, their weaknesses. Then he would create elaborate plans to humiliate them publicly. He called it cleansing Dubai of impure women. Karim's confession exposed a network of men who targeted educated, independent women with past relationships. They used social media manipulation, paid informants, and systematic harassment to drive their victims into isolation and despair. Dariush was their leader, a man who had turned misogyny into a twisted crusade. The investigation exploded both families' carefully constructed lies, but more importantly, it brought forward 3 women who had survived Dariush's previous campaigns. Samira, a former teacher, described how Dariush had systematically destroyed her career by spreading rumors about her past relationships. She'd been forced to leave Dubai in shame, her family disowning her after his evidence was revealed. Nadia, a successful businesswoman, told of how Dariush had infiltrated her social circle, gathering information about her university years abroad. When he exposed her past, she lost her job, her friends, and nearly her life. She had attempted suicide after the public humiliation, surviving only by chance. Lena, a journalist, revealed how Dariush had used fake social media accounts to harass her for months before publicly exposing her relationship history. The campaign had been so thorough that she'd fled the country, abandoning her career and family to escape the shame. All 3 women described the same pattern. Months of psychological torture followed by public humiliation. Dariush had destroyed their lives methodically, using their own shame and society's judgment as weapons. What they didn't know was that he'd been documenting everything, keeping detailed records of each woman's destruction like trophies. Dariush was found 3 days later in the desert outside Dubai, dehydrated and delirious. He'd fled to his family's desert compound, but paranoia had driven him further into the wilderness. When police discovered him, he was raving about cleansing and purification. His mind clearly broken by the realization that his perfect plan had destroyed him instead of his victim. His confession was more disturbing than investigators had prepared for. Dariush showed no remorse for Yasmin's death, only anger at being caught. "I was protecting other men from being deceived," he told investigators, his eyes wild with certainty. These women were living lies, pretending to be pure while hiding their shameful pasts. "I was doing God's work." Police found his personal manifesto, a 100-page document detailing his belief that modern women were corrupting traditional values. He'd planned to expand his operation, recruiting other men to help him cleanse Dubai of what he called deceptive women. The murder was never part of his plan. It was the result of his rage at being outsmarted by someone he considered inferior. The trial began 6 months after the murder, and from the moment the courtroom doors opened, it was clear this case would shake Dubai to its foundations. The prosecution's case was devastating. Evidence revealed not just a murder, but a systematic campaign of terror that had been operating in Dubai's elite circles for years. But the most powerful moments came when Dariush's previous victims took the stand. Their testimonies revealed how perfectly Dariush had weaponized traditional values to destroy modern women, how he'd used society's judgment as his weapon, how he'd turned families against their own daughters. The defense's strategy shocked even seasoned observers. Dariush's lawyers argued that their client had been driven to madness by the deceptive behavior of modern women who pretended to be traditional while hiding shameful pasts. They even attempted to blame Yasmin for her own death, arguing that her decision to confront Dariush rather than confess had provoked his violent response. This strategy backfired spectacularly, revealing the depth of misogyny that had enabled his crimes in the first place. The judge's verdict was swift: life imprisonment without possibility of parole. But the judge's statement went beyond simple justice. It was a condemnation of the thinking that had made such crimes possible. This case represents the dangerous extreme of what happens when traditional values become weapons of control, the judge declared. When the pursuit of purity becomes justification for psychological torture, when family honor becomes more important than human dignity, we create monsters who believe they're doing God's work while destroying innocent lives. The ripple effects transformed Dubai society in unexpected ways. Both families were destroyed, not just by legal consequences, but by the social ostracism that followed their exposure. Dariush's parents lost their business empire and faced criminal charges. Yasmin's family saw her father imprisoned for corruption. But from tragedy came unexpected change. Yasmin's younger sister, inspired by the courage of the women who had testified, became a powerful advocate for women's rights. She established a foundation in her sister's memory, working to protect women from the kind of systematic harassment that had claimed Yasmin's life. Dubai's legal system was forced to address gaps in its protection of women. New laws were enacted specifically targeting psychological harassment and stalking, with severe penalties for those who used traditional values to justify abusive behavior. The case sparked intense public debate about the role of tradition in modern society. Women's advocacy groups clashed with conservative voices. Religious leaders were forced to clarify that true values protected women rather than enabling their abuse. Social media companies implemented new policies to prevent the kind of systematic harassment that Dariush had pioneered. What this tragedy revealed was both disturbing and enlightening. It showed how perfectionism and control could become deadly weapons. How reducing women to their sexual history created a culture of shame that predators could exploit. How the complicity of families and society in maintaining harmful traditions could enable systematic abuse. The murder of Yasmin had been a turning point, not just for her family, but for an entire society forced to choose between protecting its image and protecting its people. As the courtroom emptied and media attention faded, one question remained. Would Dubai learn from this tragedy, or would it return to the silence that had enabled such horrors in the first place? The mirror had cracked, and there was no going back to the beautiful lie of perfection that had hidden such ugly truths. The answer would be written in the lives of the women who came after Yasmin, whether they would be protected or abandoned by a society finally forced to see itself clearly. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. This wasn't a story about one twisted man and one brave woman. This was a story about a system that created him, enabled him, and would have kept protecting him if Yasmin hadn't fought back. Even in death, she exposed the rot. And that's worth remembering.